Commander Xyrthak suppressed a yawn. The Zeta-4 exploratory fleet had been charting the outer rim for nearly a standard cycle, and the results were predictable to a fault. Primitive organic civilizations, predictable planetary formations, the usual monotonous reports. Another long shift, then a well-deserved return to the core worlds of the Zalkari Empire. Or so he thought. "Commander, sensors are detecting an unusual energy signature," Lieutenant Threxus announced, his voice snapping Xyrthak back to attention. "Define unusual, Lieutenant," Xyrthak said, a faint edge creeping into his otherwise perfectly modulated voice. "Well, sir." Threxus hesitated, his mandibles twitching subtly, a sign of discomposure. "It appears to be a projectile-based planetary defense grid, sir." Silence fell over the sensor station. A projectile defense system implied the very height of primitivism. Zalkari starships hadn't had to waste energy countering such archaic nonsense in millennia. A chuckle escaped Xyrthak's vocalizer. "Are you certain, Lieutenant? Perhaps calibrate the sensors again. A malfunction after such a tedious voyage would be most amusing." "Instruments are calibrated, sir. The readings are undeniable," Threxus squeaked. "The projected trajectory places the origin on the third planet of this otherwise unremarkable solar system." Xyrthak strode towards the central display, his irritation growing with every step. There, a crude representation of a planetary defense network flickered into existence. Comically slow projectile emitters ringed a blue-green planet, their engagement vectors so predictable it bordered on the insulting. Xyrthak tapped a command sequence. "Identify the dominant species. No doubt these projectiles are a rudimentary first attempt at off-world defense," he said, sarcasm evident. The sensor suite ran its analysis, and a grainy image materialized bipedal organic, with a disturbing lack of carapace or exoskeleton. Xyrthak recoiled slightly, suppressing a shiver of distaste that was entirely inappropriate for a Zalkari officer. "Designation: humans," the ship's AI intoned. "Species appears remarkably fragile." "Remarkably fragile indeed," Xyrthak agreed, the amusement now genuine and tinged with a touch of pity. "Transmit a basic greeting," Xyrthak waved a dismissive claw. "Something along the lines of surrender or be eradicated. Standard first contact protocol. Lieutenant, set course for the third planet. This detour should prove to be a diverting curiosity, if nothing else." The lieutenant's mandibles moved in agitation. Xyrthak had long suspected Threxus lacked the proper appreciation of Zalkari superiority, but even he couldn't dispute the overwhelming technological gulf between them and the inhabitants of this backwater world. As the Zeta-4 flagship began its approach vector, Xyrthak found himself pondering the nature of the primitive mind. Would these humans surrender at the sight of their inevitable doom? Or perhaps their feeble logic would drive them towards a futile stand. Either way, it would make an entertaining report to write. General Anya Petrova, veteran of a dozen backwater peacekeeping operations, had never felt so utterly outmatched. The display in the Global Defense Command bunker showed it all, the Zalkari fleet effortlessly swatting aside their initial missile salvos, the laughable ineffectiveness of Earth's cobbled-together laser defenses. "General, they're requesting a formal response to the offer," a comms officer stammered. Anya grimaced. "Offer?" It was a death sentence with a mockingly polite tone. "Let's have it then," she said, voice steady despite the knot of dread twisting in her stomach. An alien visage filled the screen. 4 multifaceted eyes glittered with cold amusement. Thin, segmented lips curled into a smile that might have been pity were its owner capable of such an emotion. Anya braced herself. "I am Commander Xyrthak of the Zalkari Empire," the alien rasped, its voice translated with unsettling perfection. "Your rudimentary defense systems suggest a laughable level of technological ignorance. Submit to Zalkari dominion, and your inevitable extermination will be mercifully swift." Rage coursed through Anya, a welcome sensation compared to the gnawing despair she'd been fighting. It was foolish, pointless rage, but oh so very human. "You may find our technology laughable, Commander," she retorted, "but you haven't experienced human resolve." A flicker of uncertainty crossed Xyrthak's face, a subtle twitch of a mandible, and for a heartbeat she felt satisfaction. "General Petrova, I must object." Dr. Hiroshi Tanaka, head of the laughably named Miracle Weapons Division, interjected. He was practically bouncing with a manic energy that bordered on unstable. "We have barely begun to test." He jabbed a finger towards the display. "The Phase 2 modifications, it's premature to—" Anya cut him off with a raised hand. "It's over, Dr. Sisser, signal our surrender." Her words were met with utter disbelief. Tanaka sputtered, even hardened soldiers stared at her in shock. But Anya saw the truth in the cold efficiency displayed by the Zalkari commander. They had nothing, not even the wild-eyed genius of Tanaka, to match that. Xyrthak regarded the human transmission with a mix of puzzlement and a grudging professional respect. They had surrendered, as any rational species would. And yet, the female their leader, if the primitive military protocols translated correctly, had an air of defiance that pricked at his meticulous Zalkari sensibilities. "Commander," Lieutenant Threxus ventured, his voice unusually hesitant, "might this surrender be a deceptive ploy?" The thought had crossed Xyrthak's mind too. It was illogical, foolish even. Yet the sensor readings were irrefutable. The humans were dismantling their already pathetic defensive structures. A ploy this transparent would be an insult to even their minimal intellect, he finally mused. He had humored those concerns enough. Prepare a landing party. Standard subjugation protocols will suffice. He watched the human leader disappear from the screen. There was something strangely unsettling about the woman's eyes. Anya stared at her reflection in the darkened screen of the now defunct command center. Defiance had ebbed away, replaced by a bone-deep exhaustion she had never experienced, not even in the hellish trenches of the Martian insurrection. There was no way out, no clever ploy, just a delaying of the inevitable. Her gaze fell upon a small, battered photograph tucked into the corner of the monitor. Her daughter, smiling defiantly, the spark of her mother reflected in her eyes. She owed them a chance, however slim. There was always a chance. "General, there's an anomaly developing within the Zalkari fleet." A panicked voice from the comm station cut through her thoughts. Heart-pounding, Anya rushed back to the main screen. The orderly Zalkari formations were breaking apart, several ships slewing wildly off course. "What in the blazes is Tanaka up to?" Anya muttered. She had half expected the eccentric scientist to ignore her orders and fire off some half-baked scheme. Yet this seemed beyond even his usual madness. Sensors zoomed in on one of the affected Zalkari cruisers. Strange lights flickered across its exposed hull as systems appeared to malfunction. "They're not firing on us, General," a tech officer stated in disbelief. "Their own weapons systems, they're turning against them." For the first time in hours, a sliver of hope ignited in Anya Petrova's heart. Was it possible? Could Tanaka's gamble have actually paid off? Vareen, a junior science officer on the Zeta 4 flagship, stared in horrified fascination at the rapidly deteriorating situation. The human counterattack, if one could even call it, that was baffling every principle of warfare the Zalkari held sacred. Malfunction in primary targeting systems. Vareen's counterpart on the sister cruiser shrieked over the comms. "Weight plasma cannons are destabilizing evasive maneuvers." It was too late. The cruiser shuddered, then erupted in a brilliant flash of uncontrolled energy, the explosion rippling outwards and crippling two nearby Zalkari vessels. Chaos descended upon their once orderly fleet. "How?" Commander Xyrthak's bellow shook the bridge. "Explain this absurdity." I don't know, Commander," Vareen stammered, struggling to process the sensor readouts. The cause of the malfunctions was incomprehensible, a tangled mess of contradictory data. It was as if the human projectiles were interacting with Zalkari systems in a way that defied logic. "Sir, the humans. They're deploying another wave of those archaic weapons," an officer cried out, fear lacing his voice. "They aren't targeting us directly, but—" Xyrthak turned his gaze towards the planet, a scowl marring his features. Through the viewports, he could see the primitive projectiles arcing upwards, seemingly oblivious to the Zalkari fleet. Their targets appeared to be random points in space around the disabled ships. "They're not weapons." Realization dawned on Xyrthak, a cold horror seeping into his perfectly ordered mind. They're instruments of chaos. The human projectiles detonated in seemingly empty space, but the effect on the surrounding Zalkari ships was catastrophic. Sensor arrays went haywire, overloading with nonsensical readings. Secondary power cores flared out of control. Entire sections of Zalkari cruisers inexplicably went dark. It was brilliant. It was barbaric. It was undeniably effective. The elegant precision of the Zalkari fleet was crumbling under an assault that could not be predicted, contained, or countered. Xyrthak, for the first time in his long and distinguished career, felt the icy touch of fear. "LT." Zara Khan grinned, a wild, desperate grin splitting her soot-smeared face. Banking her battered fighter away from a Zalkari ship, spitting malfunctioning energy beams, she punched the comms. "Command, did you see that? Did you see it?" she yelled, adrenaline pumping through her veins. The silence that followed wasn't the usual comms discipline. It was stunned, disbelieving silence. "Khan, are you confirming those sensor readings were accurate?" General Petrova's voice crackled over the speakers, strained but with an undeniable note of hope. "Accurate? Ma'am, it's glorious chaos up here," Zara whooped. The doc was right. Those oversized tin cans are tearing themselves apart. Petrova's response was a barked laugh, edged with relief and a fierce satisfaction. For Zara, it was the sweetest sound she'd ever heard. It meant they just might have a chance. "Focus, Lieutenant," Petrova said, her voice regaining its commanding tone. "Tanaka assures us that the Zalkari systems are maximally compromised. Exploit their vulnerability. Standard dogfighting principles apply, even against malfunctioning behemoths." Zara glanced back to where the bulk of the Zalkari fleet was desperately attempting to regain order. The sight was incredible. The sleek, all-powerful Zalkari ships were listing, sparks flying from their hulls, desperately swerving to avoid collisions with their own kind. The tables had turned, and it was intoxicating. "Standard dogfighting it is," Zara echoed, a predatory smile curling her lips. Her old, hopelessly outclassed fighter suddenly felt like the deadliest weapon in the solar system. It was time to hunt. From his vantage point on the bridge of the crippled Zeta 4, Xyrthak felt his composure finally crack. It was humiliation, a far more dangerous sensation than fear. The humans, these primitive creatures, had outmaneuvered them. The battle wasn't being lost due to superior firepower or advanced tactics, but an utter misunderstanding of the very nature of conflict. "They have rendered logic irrelevant," Vareen whispered, echoing his commander's thoughts. The young officer, once an eager proponent of Zalkari superiority, was a pale shadow of his former self. "Signal retreat," Xyrthak forced out the words, each one tasting like ashes in his mouth. "Scramble long-range comms, the core worlds must be warned about what we have encountered here." He could already imagine the reaction back home. Not fear, the Zalkari were beyond such weakness, but a cold fury, tinged with a morbid curiosity. Earth wasn't merely a conquered backwater anymore. It was a puzzle, a dangerous, maddening, exhilarating puzzle. The comms buzzed back to life, filled with the relieved chatter of pilots and ground crews. Yet Anya remained seated amidst the makeshift command center, staring at the receding Zalkari vessels. It was a victory, or at least a reprieve, but an uneasy feeling gnawed at her. They'd won a battle, not a war. And the cost? It would take days to tally the true losses in ships and lives. "General, comms are picking up a transmission from the Zalkari commander," the officer on duty relayed. On screen, Anya sighed. At least the Zalkari could be counted on for rigid formality, even in defeat. Xyrthak's face filled the screen, any prior arrogance replaced with a chilling resolve. "General, let me express my admiration. Your deceptive gambit was audacious, undeniably successful in this instance." His segmented lips curled into a semblance of a smile, devoid of amusement. "Know this, the Zalkari Empire will dissect your strategy, identify its flaws, and develop an appropriate countermeasure." "You don't waste time, do you, Commander?" Anya countered, surprised at the lack of bitterness in her voice. "Perhaps a short period of contemplation over how readily you dismissed an entire world would serve you well." She was probing, attempting to gauge the depths of the Zalkari obsession with efficiency, a potential vulnerability to exploit in the future. Contemplation is a luxury we shall indulge in after your unique capabilities are catalogued and neutralized. Xyrthak's reply crackled over the comms. He gestured, a sweeping motion encompassing the earth. You have purchased yourself time, human. Your world is intriguing. Do not squander this reprieve. The transmission cut off abruptly. Anya leaned back in her chair, processing the Zalkari commander's parting words. She shared a look with Tanaka, who had emerged from where he was undoubtedly tinkering with a pile of salvaged tech, his manic energy replaced by a grim determination. I get the feeling, Doc, that this is just the beginning, she said. Tanaka chuckled, a low, slightly manic sound. The fun part of science general is that there's always a new experiment to run, a new way to upend the established order. As long as we keep thinking, keep twisting what we have on hand, maybe. A glimmer appeared in his eyes. Maybe we even stand a chance when they come back. Anya could only pray that his optimism wasn't misplaced. Vareen wasn't sure when his perspective had irrevocably shifted. He boarded the Zeta-4 brimming with the self-assured superiority common to all Zalkari. Earth was to be nothing more than a footnote in his service record. Instead, the encounter had shaken his rigid worldview to its core. Now, back on the Zalkari homeworld, he walked through the halls of the High Command with an unease he couldn't quite shake. The report on the Earth debacle had been received with expected shock and outrage, quickly replaced by a cold, methodical analysis. The human strategy, if one could call it that, was being dissected, its chaotic brilliance, leaving the finest Zalkari military minds both baffled and perversely fascinated. Vareen knew the Empire wouldn't rest until they found a countermeasure, until Earth's clever tricks were reduced to mere calculations in a battle equation. And then, he found himself assigned to one of the newly formed research divisions, Task Force Terra, they called it. Here, surrounded by relics of the botched invasion, Vareen began the painstaking process of unraveling the secrets of human warfare. It was a strange mix of revulsion and a grudging, unwelcome excitement. One particular piece of salvaged tech drew his attention, a fragment of a projectile launcher twisted and charred from the battle. The markings on it were primitive, undeniably crude. Yet it was the modification Tanaka's team had haphazardly welded to it that made Vareen's hearts quicken. The human modifications violated a dozen known principles of energy transfer and weapons engineering, and yet they had worked. Vareen spent sleepless cycles trying to reconcile the theoretical impossibility of the device with the data from the battle itself. Slowly, agonizingly, a terrifying realization dawned on him. The humans hadn't just been clever. They had operated on assumptions so outlandish, so illogical, that the Zalkari had not even factored them into their predictions. The humans weren't merely fighting differently, they thought differently. He presented his findings to his superiors, bracing for the expected ridicule. Instead, he was met with an unsettling silence. The implications were too profound, too unsettling to be dismissed outright. Lieutenant Vareen, the task force commander, finally rumbled, "The greatest threat to the Empire may not be those projectile launchers or any weapon they build. It might be their minds." The first Zalkari delegation to Earth in decades was anticlimactic. There were no warships looming overhead, no threats of annihilation. Instead, the small, heavily guarded diplomatic vessel requested a formal audience with the United Earth Council. Anya found herself in the unusual position of wearing a tailored suit instead of fatigues as she greeted the Zalkari envoys on behalf of Earth. Xyrthak was not among them, a calculated absence, no doubt. General Petrova, the lead Zalkari diplomat, inclined his head. "Let me extend condolences for the lives lost in our regrettable misunderstanding." The apology felt hollow, but it was an apology nonetheless, a sign of the grudging respect Earth had earned. "Let's not waste time, Ambassador," Anya replied, keeping her tone neutral. "What does the Zalkari Empire hope to achieve with this dialogue?" Talks stretched over days, a delicate dance of proposals, veiled threats, and the careful exploration of potential collaborations. Earth had little to offer the Zalkari technologically, but the potential for trade deals dangled precariously resources in exchange for the guarantee Earth wouldn't become a future target. Most intriguing were the discussions on military theory. Anya was granted access to the Zalkari tactical database, its vast catalog of battles won through meticulous strategy and superior tech. In return, she reluctantly agreed to provide limited analysis of the Earth engagement. The Zalkari were horrified and fascinated by the Earth's defense grid, the tangle of repurposed comm satellites, solar power arrays, and jury-rigged energy weapons Tanaka had cobbled together. They struggled to understand how it had worked, disgusted by its inelegance, yet undeniably intrigued by its effectiveness. Unbeknownst to them, Tanaka was already 3 iterations ahead, pushing the limits of the absurd, buoyed by a mix of desperation and the grim thrill of knowing the most advanced empire in the galaxy was feverishly trying to copy his homework. One evening, Anya found herself sharing a drink with a surprisingly subdued Vareen on a terrace overlooking a rebuilt cityscape. "You know," he confessed, "at first we thought you were simply barbarians. Now I'm not so sure." "Maybe we're the barbarians you need," Anya countered. Vareen chuckled mirthlessly, then turned a serious gaze upon her. "General, tell me honestly, was your victory a planned strategy or a desperate gamble?" Anya hesitated, then replied, "Does it matter when the results are the same?" She could tell the answer unsettled him far more than any battle ever could. The news rippled through the solar system like a shockwave. A collaborative research station was to be established in neutral territory, with Zalkari and human scientists working side by side to unlock the secrets of everything. General Petrova, appointed reluctant Earth ambassador for the project, was the obvious choice. Dr. Tanaka was practically vibrating with excitement, alternating between manic glee and muttering about unprecedented opportunities for accidental plasma detonations. Among the Zalkari public, opinion was divided. Some saw the alliance as a necessary strategic step to counter a surprising threat. Others decried it, calling for armed retribution against the upstart humans. Yet a fascinated curiosity ran like an undercurrent through every dissenting voice. Commander Xyrthak watched the reports with a mix of cold fury and a strategist's grudging appreciation. Earth had proven itself not merely annoying but potentially useful. They were a disruptive variable in an otherwise predictable galaxy, an element of chaos that could be turned into a tool should they prove controllable. His gaze strayed to a salvaged piece of human tech scavenged from the battlefield, a crude projectile launcher with nonsensical modifications blinking random patterns of light. His subordinates assured him the device was harmless, yet it continued to confound the best Zalkari technicians. It was infuriating, mesmerizing, and undeniably a sign. The Zalkari Empire, Xyrthak knew, would never be the same. They couldn't return to their old sense of absolute superiority. Earth, that backwater planet with its illogical weapons and inexplicably resilient people, had forced them, the Zalkari, to adapt. It was a prospect as unpleasant as it was necessary. The research station was a monstrosity of cobbled-together modules, a testament to the deep unease between both species. Yet, within the sterile laboratories, something akin to camaraderie began to flicker. A Zalkari researcher specializing in energy transfer found herself explaining the fundamentals of her work to Tanaka, who promptly interrupted her with a dozen outlandish theoretical applications. To her surprise, some held the faint glimmer of potential. An argument broke out, a heated mix of Zalkari and surprisingly expressive human hand gestures. In another lab, a young, idealistic human engineer named Lieutenant Khan worked reluctantly alongside Vareen. He still blamed the Zalkari for the lives lost, including those of her squadron mates. Yet, Vareen's insights into the rigid strengths and vulnerabilities of the Zalkari warships sparked a ruthless idea within her, a way to turn her enemies' meticulous predictability against them. Khan found herself begrudgingly sketching out the concept, Vareen adding refinements with unexpected enthusiasm. It was slow, fraught with misunderstandings, suspicion barely kept in check. But the possibility hung tantalizingly in the air. 2 vastly different species, former enemies, bound together by a grudging respect born from conflict, and a shared chilling realization. The galaxy they were slowly discovering was far more interesting and far more dangerous than either the Zalkari or humans ever could have imagined. The alarm shrieked through the research station, a soul-chilling sound designed to wake the dead. But this wasn't a drill. Sensors across the outer rim of the monitored territory were going haywire. General Petrova reached the main ops center seconds after Tanaka, her instincts on high alert. Initial readings were gibberish, a nonsensical wave of energy washing over the sector like a malfunctioning galactic tide. Then the screens flickered, stabilizing into a coherent image. An armada of warships materialized from seemingly nowhere, their design utterly alien. Sleek organic lines pulsed with bioluminescence, weapons bristled from their hulls. The ships moved with a horrifying predatory grace, converging on the research station. Unknown classification, the comms officer's voice shook. No match to any known species on record. Get me the Zalkari, Anya barked the order. Emergency channels, authorization code Omega-1. Fear was a cold fist in her gut, but determination outweighed it. If they fell, they would fall fighting together, the only way they knew how. Minutes later, a Zalkari cruiser flickered into existence next to the besieged station. Ambassador Varin's face creased in grim determination filled the main screen. Unidentified warships, General, he stated, his voice tight. Threat level. Varin's eyes widened as he processed the sensor feed, threat level critical. Tanaka was cackling, a mad glint in his eyes. Oh, this is rich. They've never seen anything like us, General. What do you say, shake things up a bit? Anya caught the edge of shared madness in the scientist's eyes, an echo of her own desperate exhilaration. Earth tech was unpredictable, the Zalkari coldly methodical, yet with Tanaka's jury-rigged innovations and the element of surprise on their side, they just might have a fighting chance against these unknown invaders. A crazy, terrifyingly reckless chance. Ambassador Varin, she said to the shocked Zalkari on the monitor, my apologies, but it looks like our research collaboration is going to get an unexpected field test. The humans called it controlled chaos. The Zalkari dubbed it strategically sanctioned madness. Whatever the designation, its effectiveness was undeniable. Humans piloted jury-rigged fighters, spitting erratic bursts of energy fire, overloading the targeting systems of the sleek alien aggressors. Modified Earth comm arrays spewed out waves of disruptive signals, scrambling the enemy's neatly ordered formations. All the while, Zalkari cruisers unleashed disciplined volleys, guided by the humans' frantic warnings about the aliens' sensor weak points. In the thick of the battle, Commander Xyrthak watched with a horrified fascination, revising his battle strategy with every unpredictable swerve of a human fighter. The aliens they fought were sloppy. Their bio-based tech pulsated with energy signatures so bizarre as to be unreadable, and yet, in the hands of the humans and their Zalkari allies, the results were devastating. It was a battle won on improvisation, on split-second decisions propelled by a mix of desperation, instinct, and grudging mutual trust. The aftermath of the unexpected invasion was a tentative silence. Beaten back, the remnants of the alien armada retreated, leaving behind a trail of disabled ships and an even greater array of questions. Aboard the hastily patched-up research station, humans and Zalkari alike slumped in exhaustion interspersed with wary satisfaction. The cost in lives and resources was sobering, yet a strange sense of pride ran alongside the grief. Well, Varin, Anya said, her voice hoarse, addressing the Zalkari ambassador, I do believe that constitutes a successful collaborative experiment. Varin attempted a dry chuckle. His eyes flickered between the displays showing the damaged Zalkari cruiser and a battered human gunship docked awkwardly against a Zalkari docking bay, a testament to a hastily forged, incredibly effective battle alliance. Undeniably so, General, he admitted cautiously, though I trust my superiors will demand a significantly more detailed report than that. Tanaka materialized behind them, hair wild, lab coat stained with unidentifiable substances, and a grin far too wide for Anya's comfort. Ambassador, I must say, your shield harmonics have fascinating interactions with our modified comm pulses. Imagine the possibilities if... As Tanaka launched into a manic outline of potential weapons applications, Anya exchanged a tired look with Varin. Their work, it seemed, had only just begun. The Zalkari delegation remained on the station for months longer than originally planned. Earth became a flurry of combined task forces, diplomatic maneuvering, and reluctantly shared tech innovations. Reports going back to the Zalkari core worlds were contradicting. The humans were clearly dangerous, brilliant in an alarmingly chaotic way, and infuriatingly resilient. Yet, their potential as an ally. Commander Xyrthak scowled at the latest dispatch from the research station. It detailed a collaborative plan for early detection systems, cobbled together by Tanaka, Vareen, and that relentlessly cheerful human pilot, Lieutenant Khan. The design was illogical, likely to malfunction spectacularly, and might actually work. He suppressed the alien sensation of a sigh. Earth had altered the Zalkari's neatly ordered universe. The galaxy no longer operated under the rules they had so meticulously mastered. Adapt or perish Earth had taught them this brutal lesson with their laughably crude projectile launchers and brilliant, baffling minds. His gaze fell upon a small, roughly welded metal device salvaged from the wreckage of the invaders. It flickered with unstable energy, its purpose a mystery even the finest Zalkari technicians couldn't decipher. It was proof that the galaxy held greater threats, stranger mysteries than any of them had imagined. A grudging respect for the humans warred with his long-held belief in Zalkari superiority. This alliance wouldn't be easy, and with species as volatile as themselves involved, it was bound to be explosive. But it was necessary. A flicker of anticipation, as alien as it was unwelcome, stirred within him. Commander Xyrthak had always excelled at mastering the predictable. Now, it seemed, his skills would be tested in an entirely new arena of exhilarating, terrifying chaos. Perhaps, he begrudgingly conceded, this was exactly what the Zalkari Empire needed. The bar was a neutral zone, neither Zalkari nor human, but a hodgepodge of species drawn to the research station. Anya found herself sipping a surprisingly palatable synthetic liquor across a chipped table from Ambassador Vareen. The tense camaraderie forged in mutual survival was slowly giving way to a cautious something else. "Tell me, General," Vareen began, voice softer than his normal commanding tone, "during the battle, were you scared?" The question took Anya by surprise. Fear was a weakness, a soldier couldn't afford it. But honesty, that had been the unexpected byproduct of their forced alliance. "Terrified," she confessed. "More scared than I've ever been. But also," Anya searched for the right word, "alive." It was like every ragged breath meant something more. Every decision was a gamble on a future I wasn't sure we even had. Vareen processed this, a thoughtful tilt to his segmented head. "We Zalkari," he mused, "do not have a term for that feeling your species seems to thrive on. It is unsettling and yet grudgingly compelling." A roar of laughter cut through their conversation. Tanaka, half propped against Lieutenant Khan, was regaling a group of techs from half a dozen species with some outlandish battle story. He punctuated it with a wave of his drink, sending droplets flying towards an astoundingly unfazed Zalkari with intimidating chitin plating. "That," Anya indicated towards the raucous scene, "is what has your superiors scrambling, I suspect. Not the tech, though that's unsettling enough, it's the fact that we seem to be having fun." The word sounded foreign applied to warfare. Vareen made a low, humming sound. "Fun, dangerously unpredictable, and potentially infectious." They fell silent as an uneasy understanding settled between them. The Zalkari had come to Earth expecting easy conquest. Instead, they found chaos, and a strange kind of invigorating challenge within it. Later, Anya stood alone on an observation deck, watching the stars flicker around the skeletal framework of the expanding research station. It was no longer merely a place for shared tech or grudging strategy sessions. It was a testament to the galaxy turning on its axis. "Beautiful mess, isn't it?" a voice murmured behind her. Commander Xyrthak stood tall, his usual air of rigid control marred by a hint of weariness. "That it is, Commander," Anya agreed. She sensed a shift in him, a begrudging acceptance echoing her own. "The Zalkari delegation will be departing soon," he stated, the information heavy between them. "And replaced by another?" Anya knew this dance. They were both players now in a galactic game with dangerously high stakes. "A more permanent presence," Xyrthak confirmed. "My superiors believe an extended containment period is necessary." The word hung heavy in the air, a reminder of old enmities. Anya simply inclined her head. "We'll continue to surprise you, Commander." Xyrthak's answering rumble held a hint of something strangely akin to amusement. "I sincerely hope so, General." The new Zalkari embassy on Earth wasn't some imposing military installation, but a cluster of sleek structures nestled incongruously amidst sprawling terrestrial farmland. Anya found the sight strangely pleasing. An alien force, but one operating somewhat within the bounds of human rules. Her official visit, the first of many to come, felt more like walking into a potential battlefield than a diplomatic exchange. Yet the receiving hall was filled not with generals, but Zalkari scholars, historians, linguists, even a xenosociologist specializing in illogical cultural behaviors. Leading them was Ambassador Varine, a flicker of amusement in those multifaceted eyes. "General, allow me to introduce a more unconventional branch of our diplomatic corps," he said with a subtle emphasis that hinted at internal battles she could only imagine. The lead Zalkari scholar, a formidable-looking female whose name translated to something approximating seeker of unsettling truths, stepped forward. "We have been tasked with understanding the human phenomenon." Her voice was precise, but curiosity underscored the clinical tone. Over the following weeks, Anya endured endless interviews, debates, and meticulously planned social functions where every movement, every word, was dissected and analyzed with terrifying Zalkari thoroughness. To her surprise, Tanaka took to the scholars with perverse glee, dragging them into the chaos of his labs, while bombarding them with dizzying scientific rants interspersed with alarmingly casual offers to dissect their tech. "It's glorious, General," he crowed to her one evening. "They're trying so desperately to create precise models for spontaneous combustion. The things we could teach them if they just unclench a bit." Anya had to admit, watching the Zalkari delegation grapple with human unpredictability was a grimly satisfying spectacle. Yet under the humor lurked a cold truth. They were dissecting Earth just as they would any other enemy. The turning point came unexpectedly in the form of a malfunctioning food synthesizer. Zalkari cuisine was centered on precision-engineered nutrition packs. Faced with an explosion of flavors and textures designed for human pleasure, not mere sustenance, the result was a diplomatic incident waiting to happen. Varine, with a flicker of genuine panic in his eyes, found Anya in the gardens. "General, I require your assistance. Several of my researchers are exhibiting unusual behavioral patterns after exposure to what your people deem pizza." She managed not to laugh at the sight that greeted her. 3 of the most logical Zalkari scholars she'd encountered engaged in a heated debate over the relative merits of strange toppings, while waving half-eaten slices with alarming enthusiasm. "A bit like a flavor explosion, isn't it?" Anya offered. Varine released a low groan. "General, this is a cultural contagion." She couldn't hold back the laughter then. "Welcome to our world, Ambassador." The alarm echoing through the halls of the Zalkari embassy was not for a military threat, but a far more dangerous one, an outbreak of laughter. It started not among the humans, but within a cluster of junior-level Zalkari researchers tasked with cross-cultural analysis. Patient Zero, it turned out, had stumbled upon a collection of human entertainment, recordings those deemed far too chaotic for initial study. The infection, as it became known, spread at an alarming rate, fueled by the victims' utter bafflement at their own involuntary diaphragm spasms. Commander Xyrthak's bellow nearly shook the foundations of the embassy. He'd returned with the next diplomatic rotation, his rigid control barely masking simmering fury. "General Petrova, this has gone beyond an academic curiosity. I demand a cure for this aberration." Across the negotiating table, Anya maintained a veneer of calm despite the faint twitch at the corner of her eye. "Commander, we humans call that humor. It's a survival mechanism of sorts, helps us deal with otherwise impossible situations." "Survival, perhaps," Xyrthak's voice remained clipped. "But at what cost to order and efficiency? My own officers are." He faltered momentarily, mandibles twitching as he clearly searched for a suitable Zalkari translation. Giggling, he finally finished with disgust. An unexpected sound broke through the tension. A soft chuckle from Varine. The ambassador quickly stifled it, but the damage was done. Xyrthak's glare zeroed in on his subordinate. "Ambassador," the commander hissed, You are not immune to this disorder. Vareen swallowed audibly. Commander, it appears prolonged exposure to humans carries unpredictable side effects. Suddenly, Tanaka burst in, an impish grin on his face. Commander, excellent news. Your officers' involuntary laughter patterns hold potential for disrupting alien sonar. Imagine the tactical implications. The look on Xyrthak's face was a masterpiece of horrified incredulity. He sputtered, then spun on his heel and stalked out, his rigid posture tight with outrage. Vareen released a shaky breath, several of his segmented legs twitching in a distinctly unnerved manner. Only then did Anya allow herself a small, satisfied smile. The Zalkari had come to Earth prepared for war. Instead, they found themselves battling a far more insidious enemy: absurdity. The Zalkari delegation's monthly report to the High Council spiraled into unprecedented territory. It detailed catastrophic declines in efficiency metrics, the alarming phenomenon of high-ranking officers questioning the need for 17 copies of identical reports, and included a strongly worded plea for additional researchers specializing in the analysis of human children's games as a potential source for understanding baffling tactical maneuvers. Anya caught glimpses of that report, passed along by a quietly amused Vareen. The image of Zalkari scholars solemnly dissecting the strategic implications of hide and seek gave her a much-needed moment of levity amid the growing tensions. For tensions were, inevitably, escalating elsewhere. Earth and its newfound, increasingly uneasy Zalkari allies had become a beacon in the darkness, proof that resistance was possible against empires deemed untouchable. Delegations from beleaguered star systems, from fringe colonies rebelling against rigid control, flocked to the Sol system. The research station transformed into the unlikely heart of a nascent rebellion. Zalkari efficiency found itself pitted against the sheer, glorious mess of 100 worlds with 100 grievances, bound together by a desperate hope and the human's unique brand of optimistic defiance, as Ambassador Vareen had dryly termed it. Anya often found herself mediating between species at odds for centuries, relying more on her rusty psychology peacekeeping skills than any military expertise. Yet, within the chaos, a pattern emerged. Those drawn to Earth held in common a hatred of cold, unyielding order, a yearning for the messy freedom humanity embodied, even if they feared the price. One evening, she found herself in the station's hydroponics dome, sharing a moment of quiet with Lieutenant Khan and a surprisingly introspective Vareen. The lush greenery felt like a respite from the constant pressure. You know, Khan said softly, her voice tinged with melancholy, some of these worlds, they remind me of my home colony before the Zalkari came. Rigidity breeds its own kind of rebellion, Vareen agreed, a low rumble underlying his words. The Empire expanded on promises of stability. Now we are forced to confront consequences. They fell silent, watching stars bloom amidst the tangled vines. We may not win, you know, Anya finally admitted. The combined might of a dozen empires angry at having their order upended. Those aren't battles you win with clever tricks and dumb luck. Yet we will fight, Vareen countered, an unexpected certainty in his multifaceted eyes. Because sometimes, Khan's voice was barely a whisper, the only choice is between kneeling and dying on your feet. A fierce pride rose within Anya, a bittersweet echo of that first desperate defiance against the Zalkari fleet. They were improbable allies, forged in conflict, bound by a fragile web of shared values barely understood yet fiercely defended. Earth had been a backwater. Now it was the epicenter of a galaxy-altering clash between cold domination and the stubborn spark of something more. News of the rebellion was no longer contained to whispers. Open conflict erupted on a dozen fronts. Zalkari fleets clashed with ragtag armadas cobbled together from human ingenuity and the salvaged tech of 100 defiant species. The neatly ordered, predictable galaxy spun further into magnificent, terrifying chaos. Commander Xyrthak stood on the bridge of his flagship, surveying yet another battlefield gone awry. His strategy sessions now included not only Zalkari tacticians, but also a bewildered human delegation led by General Petrova, shouting about feint maneuvers and deliberately triggering enemy panic responses, whatever that may mean. Their fleets lack cohesion, their strategies hold no logic, Xyrthak raged, yet the frustration in his voice held an equally potent undercurrent of grudging fascination. He turned his gaze towards Anya, standing defiantly amidst his officers. "Explain, human." A ghost of a smile tilted Anya's lips. She'd grown weary, lines of strain etched on her face. Yet her eyes held the sharp glint of a seasoned gambler placing an all-or-nothing bet. "Chaos isn't the absence of order, Commander," she said, voice ringing clear through the tense silence. "It's a different kind of order, one you haven't learned to read yet." "We Zalkari will decipher it," Xyrthak's reply held iron determination. "We will counter every illogical strategy, crush every desperate gamble until—" He paused, his rigid mask of superiority slipping just enough to reveal the begrudging truth. "Until it is predictable again." "And what if it isn't, Commander?" Anya challenged. "What if chaos is the new rule of this galaxy? What will you Zalkari do then?" The question hung heavy in the air. Xyrthak did not have an answer, not yet. But Anya could see the seeds of doubt, a sliver of uncertainty amidst that unrelenting drive for control. The Empire would adapt, they always did. But the price of that adaptation, it may shatter the very foundations upon which Zalkari power was built. The galaxy, she realized, wasn't just at war. It was undergoing a fundamental shift, the tremors echoing through every star system. The question was, what would emerge from the ashes, a return to the old tyranny, or a terrifying, exhilarating, unpredictable new dawn? Perhaps, she grimly conceded, only more chaos would provide the answer. The battle for the Keldaran system was a turning point, and not for any strategic reason. Zalkari warships, pinnacle of order, were forced into a humiliating retreat after a human auxiliary cruiser, piloted by an intoxicated crew celebrating some obscure Earth holiday, accidentally triggered a cascading overload in their communication grid, while blaring a disturbingly cheerful musical composition titled Jingle Bells. The incident was as humiliating as it was tactically irrelevant. Yet, across the Keldaran system, oppressed populations erupted in laughter, a defiant, joyous wave of rebellion, echoing the absurdity of their unlikely saviors. Back on Earth, Commander Xyrthak held a piece of salvaged human tech, a child's toy, crude and colorful. It beeped at unpredictable intervals, spun erratically, and was utterly impossible to disarm without triggering an explosion of glitter and irritating noises. A perfect metaphor, he realized, for everything about humanity that infuriated and fascinated him in equal measure. "We must redefine victory, Commander," Vareen stated, echoing his superior's thoughts. The ambassador had become a strange hybrid, outwardly Zalkari, but his voice now carried the grim amusement of one forever changed by their time amidst humans. "Victory," Xyrthak considered, turning the infuriating toy over in his claws, "is no longer about restoring order, it is about surviving the chaos." They stared at each other, the weight of this realization settling between them. Victory meant adaptation, no matter how unpalatable those changes may be. Zalkari fleets would need to scatter and regroup, strike not as a single force, but with the fluidity their enemy possessed. Zalkari scientists would dissect not merely human tech, but human thought patterns, seeking a counter to the maddening unpredictability they now faced. Humiliation could be a powerful motivator, Xyrthak knew. This war was far from over, yet he could feel the galaxy tilting beneath their feet. Weeks later, a Zalkari cruiser armed with hastily reconfigured sensor arrays detected a hidden rebel base on a desolate moon. Yet, when the attack force arrived, they found the base abandoned, and a single human-made device left conspicuously in the central command hub. The device looked harmless, almost comical with its blinking lights and mismatched salvaged components. But Zalkari troops, instilled with a new, hard-won wariness, refused to approach it. Commander Xyrthak himself was summoned. He stared at the blinking device, suppressing a surge of fury. It was a trap, obviously. Yet, what kind of trap? "Sir," a junior officer ventured, "scanners are detecting a decaying energy source. The device may simply malfunction." Xyrthak considered his options, his carefully ordered mind thrown into disarray. Finally, he made a decision that would have been unthinkable months prior. Withdraw the troops. Let it malfunction. because chaos, he was finally learning, was a weapon that could cut both ways. Aboard the human flagship, now a battered, glorious symbol of 100 hard-fought battles, General Petrova and Lieutenant Khan stared at a transmission from the Zalkari embassy. The terms were stark, framed in the meticulous wording the Zalkari preferred even amidst chaos: a temporary ceasefire, prisoner exchanges, begrudging recognition of the fledgling rebel alliance as a belligerent power, not a mere annoyance, and finally a request for a formal summit on neutral ground to, as the message put it, establish parameters for continued unavoidable interactions. "They're blinking," Anya finally said, disbelief battling elation. "After everything." "Yeah," Zara smirked, mirroring her commander's amazement. "But look how they phrase it. Sounds like interacting with us causes them physical pain." Anya let out a bark of exhausted laughter. "Wouldn't be surprised anymore? Tanaka?" She nodded towards the eccentric scientist hovering eagerly in the background. Tanaka grinned a manic grin. "Oh, glorious possibilities. Imagine what we could do with officially sanctioned access to a Zalkari delegation, General. Simultaneous experiments in 20 labs across the..." Anya cut him off with a raised hand. "The summit first, Doc. I think we might need some diplomatic cover if things go sideways," she said with a healthy dose of pessimism. "Diplomacy, General?" Varine's voice crackled over the speakers. The ambassador's segmented features held a mix of relief and a stoic acceptance. "Is now a necessary tool amidst the less predictable variables." Anya met his multifaceted gaze through the transmission, an echo of that first tentative understanding on a scarred battlefield. "Welcome to the chaos, Ambassador. Just try not to enjoy it too much." The summit itself was an exercise in barely controlled absurdity. Zalkari and humans paced around polished negotiation tables, attempting to impose order on the fundamental clash of their natures. But there was a shift too, the Zalkari rigid but watchful. The humans, for their part, reined in their most outlandish impulses. Mostly. One particularly contentious issue was battle etiquette. "It is illogical, barbaric even, to fire upon escape pods," a senior Zalkari officer insisted, mandibles twitching with outrage. "We may reconsider," Anya conceded, "as soon as your cruisers stop bombarding civilian targets from orbit." Xyrthak himself remained a figure of imposing control, but even he was forced to concede that a galaxy aflame wasn't conducive to the precisely dictated terms of engagement the Zalkari preferred. The best they could achieve, it seemed, were mutually acknowledged limits on the extremes of warfare. A small sliver of sanity in an insane situation. The summit ended, not with a resounding peace declaration, but an agreement to keep talking. An acknowledgement that neither side could fully triumph, and perhaps, just perhaps, utter annihilation wasn't the only option. As the Zalkari delegation departed, Anya couldn't help but smile wearily at Xyrthak's departing figure. The commander still radiated disapproval, yet his usual certainty was dented. The galaxy had slipped the leash of his control, spun into dazzling, terrifying disarray. But as Anya watched the Zalkari ships vanish into the starfield, she knew their work wasn't done. Because chaos might win wars, but it was a terrible way to build peace. The harder struggle was yet to come. The decades that followed were less a triumphant era of galactic peace and more like wrangling a whirlwind, messy, exhausting, and occasionally exhilarating. Anya's hair turned silver long before the treaties were properly hashed out, the conferences marred by outbursts of laughter, usually from the human delegates, exasperated Zalkari negotiators threatening to walk out, and Tanaka having to be forcibly removed from several summits after attempting to experiment on the Zalkari delegation's power systems. The galaxy remained divided. Some star systems grudgingly returned to Zalkari control, lured by promises of stability, however brittle. Others embraced the chaotic freedom the rebellion had bought them, forming alliances built on trade agreements, mutual defense pacts, and a shared mistrust of neatly written contracts that lasted longer than a year. Earth became a nexus, a bizarre mix of cultures and species drawn to the unlikely heart of the rebellion. Zalkari embassies coexisted uneasily with sprawling markets selling delicacies that would make a Zalkari nutrition officer faint. Human negotiators learned the precise, irrefutable language of Zalkari law, while Zalkari scholars stumbled over concepts like artistic expression and calculated risk-taking. Anya herself became a reluctant legend. The general who faced down the Zalkari was a tale told in 100 variations, some inspiring, others less flattering. She spent more time mediating squabbles within the alliance than planning grand strategies, yet found a perverse satisfaction in it. Chaos needed guiding, even if it could never be truly tamed. Commander Xyrthak's path mirrored hers. The Zalkari Empire, broken but not destroyed, clung to the star systems they could still control. But change, grudging and corrosive, seeped into their ordered world. Xyrthak became the architect of a flexible containment strategy, a testament to Zalkari adaptability and a constant thorn in the Alliance's side. The man who once raged against unpredictability had now mastered it, turning chaos against its own creators. One quiet evening, decades after their first clash, Anya walked the grounds of a rebuilt human colony. The devastation of the initial Zalkari invasion had been erased, replaced by vibrant structures that melded human ingenuity with tech shared by a dozen grateful worlds. A group of children raced past, a mix of species, their laughter echoing the unyielding spirit that had defied an empire. She was no longer a general, merely an observer now. Yet a figure emerged from the shadows, tall, segmented, his once rigid certainty replaced by a weary acceptance. "Commander Xyrthak," Anya greeted him with a nod. "General Petrova," he inclined his head in return. "You humans have a saying, I believe, 'May you live in interesting times.'" Anya couldn't help but chuckle. "Yeah, well, consider it a curse we accidentally inflicted upon the entire galaxy." They stood in companionable silence, watching the children play. The galaxy remained a powder keg, the peace fragile, the future terrifyingly uncertain. "We survived," Xyrthak said softly, this statement heavy between them. "For now," Anya conceded, "and maybe, just maybe, survival is enough." The Zalkari commander made a low sound, whether agreement or resigned dissent, she couldn't tell. As he turned to leave, Anya couldn't help but ask, "Have you ever learned to enjoy the chaos, Commander?" Xyrthak paused, his segmented form silhouetted against the alien stars. Then, in a final testament to how far they both had journeyed, he allowed himself the ghost of a dry chuckle. "Enjoying it, General, would be admitting defeat," he said, a hint of his old arrogance returning. "But I have developed a grudging appreciation for the unexpected." And with that, the architect of Zalkari adaptation retreated into the night. And Anya Petrova, the woman who defied an empire, stood a little taller, knowing the fight wasn't over, the chaos wasn't conquered. But faced with the impossible, they had done the most human thing of all. They stubbornly, chaotically, and with a spark of relentless humor, refused to kneel. Perhaps that, amidst the unpredictable vastness of the galaxy, was victory enough.